All right, let's get started. Welcome everyone to the October edition of the NWGA webinar. My name is Connor Wrighton with the Northwest Gas Association, and today we're keeping the webinar in-house as we'll have our own Dan Kirschner who's on hand to present the Northwest Gas Association's annual Outlook study. Before we begin, let's talk about the basics for how these webinars work. We have set aside some time for some questions, and we strongly encourage you to ask them as they come up. Though each of you will be muted throughout the presentation, so please use the text box in the GoToMeeting control panel to type out your questions. I will see them there and will interject as needed to introduce them.
You're on mute now, they can hear you. Okay, go.
For those of you who would like a PDF copy of this presentation, please send me an email at creiten@nwga.org or respond to the email that I sent with the link to this presentation, and I will get you a copy before close of business today. We are also recording this and we'll upload it to our YouTube channel, and I can also give you the link to that about half an hour after we conclude today. As some of you may know, we do these once a month, and next month we're going to have Gary Fanger of Synergy Solutions on hand to discuss adsorbed natural gas technology. And we're capping off the 2017 webinar series with a presentation in December by Jennifer Davison of the BC Ministry of Energy, Mines and Petroleum and Scott Graham of Fortis BC. Jennifer and Scott will be talking about British Columbia's renewable natural gas program. As always, we ask that you look way ahead in your calendars and mark off June 6th and 7th for next year's 15th Annual Energy Conference, which is once again at Skamania Lodge. And finally, I'd like to introduce the Northwest Gas Association for those of you who may not know what we do. We represent the 6 investor-owned gas utilities operating in the Pacific Northwest, along with the 3 large natural gas transmission lines. Our members are located in Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and British Columbia. And as always, please visit our website at nwga.org for more information or reach out via email. And without further ado, I will pass things over to Dan.
Good afternoon. I think Connor is going to make the handoff here shortly, and I think we have it here. Let's just see if we got things coming up the way they need to come up. There, are we good to go?
Dan, we're looking good, but we can. You're a little bit faint into the microphone.
Okay, is this any better? Leaning forward.
A little bit better there.
Great. Okay. Well, it's my pleasure to bring to you all today the 2017 Outlook. The hard is in the process of being developed right now. We actually have. Is there some feedback here? As many of you know, we've gone through a review process already. We're laying the document out, and we should have a final draft for our members' review here in the next week or so, and then to be published probably within a week after that. So first to middle of November, the document itself will be published. Many of you are familiar with the Outlook, and I see a lot of familiar names on the website here, so I'm pleased to talk about it. But for those of you who aren't sure what the Outlook is, it is an aggregation of our member companies' planning documents. In the case of the natural gas utilities, that is their integrated resource plans that they file with their regulatory commissions each year. And we think it's a unique look at natural gas in our region, simply because it is a consensus view. Our members do look the document over carefully. They do review the aggregated data, and we spend a good deal of time trying to make sure vetting that data and the narrative that goes along with it to come up with, as we say, this consensus perspective on the natural gas marketplace in our region. So that's the Outlook, and I am happy to entertain any questions. Usually Connor has to do this directly, but I see the screen up here, so if you do type your questions into that chat box, I'll interrupt myself to answer those questions. So the topics for today, as is typical in our Outlook study, it's really divided into 4 parts. The first 2 parts, supply and demand are generally taken from broader, more publicly available resources, supply and prices, that is, and then the second half, demand and capacity, are from our own member companies' data. I could stop at this slide. The conclusions for each segment are supply remains abundant, prices of commodity prices remain low, demand growth in our region is modest. We do have a couple of scenarios that we'll be looking at, and we'll go over here in this presentation. And our capacity, that is the resources necessary to serve forecast demand, is sufficient for now. So as I say, I could stop, but let's dive in and take a little bit closer look at what's going on here. So everybody on this call, I'm guessing, knows what's going on with shale. That shale has really the ability to produce hydrocarbons, in our case natural gas, from shale formations, has really turned the energy world on its head. We don't need to belabor that point very much, but I think any presentation on a natural gas marketplace would be lacking if we didn't at least take a look at what's going on here. This is, in effect, what I refer to as a technology innovation. So this is an innovation that's occurred in our region that we now are able to produce from the shale resources that we've known existed for some time. And this slide really demonstrates that. So this is not a discovery of new resources. Rather, it is a discovery of the ability to produce from resource rock that we knew existed all along. In fact, the rock that is the original source of the conventional production that we've engaged in for 100 or more years. So what this slide simply shows is, because of our ability now to produce from that source rock, the resource available to us has increased about 250% over just the last 10 years. Again, what I'm trying to emphasize here is this is really an innovation play, a technology play, if you will. It's not a discovery of a new, previously undiscovered resource. And the next couple of slides will go into that a little bit deeper. Again, just emphasizing the notion of how rapidly technology has developed. If you look at this purple line moving through the middle of the chart, this was IHS's assessment of how much natural gas could be produced at what price, the supply curve, if you will. That purple line is 2010 fueling North America's future. And it demonstrated, according to IHS, that at $4 a million BTU at the Henry Hub, about 900 trillion cubic feet of gas could be produced economically. That includes an internal rate of return for the company. So that is an economic rate of return. Just to put that number, 900 trillion cubic feet, into context, today we consume on average a little bit less than 30 trillion cubic feet a year. Now, to emphasize the technology enhancement message that I'm delivering here, in 2016, IHS had a press release where they talked about shale gas reloaded, and their estimate then had changed to demonstrate that at $3, there was almost 800 trillion cubic feet of gas available economically. And at $4, the number had increased to about 1,400 trillion cubic feet from the 900 trillion cubic feet that they had estimated just 5 years or so before. So just emphasizing again the rapid development of technology. And this next slide from Wood Mackenzie does a similar thing. So these are break-even costs, including an internal rate of return for the companies for a variety of plays. And you can see the light blue bars are just a number of plays across North America. The dark blue bars are plays that our region might reasonably expect to get some gas molecules from. And the red bars are Canadian supplies, also resources where we could presume some of the molecules we consume here in this region come from. Showing an average Henry Hub price in 2016 at $2.52, Most of those plays are under that, meaning they can economically produce at that level. Now, I might just note I've had anecdotal feedback from a couple of my members that Montney bar at 250 there is really more like 175. But the point remains the same. Technology producers have worked very hard to drive the costs out of production so that they can continue to remain economic and profitable, even in this low commodity price environment. This whole thing from the ability to produce to shale to now driving costs out of production has been really a technology play from the beginning. I'm going to talk a little bit about our supplies, where we get our gas from. You see up there in Alberta and British Columbia, Western Canada Sedimentary Basin. And we also get some portion of our gas from the US Rocky Mountain West and the San Juan Basin in New Mexico. And this is the supply forecast according to the National Energy Board in Canada. And it's October 2016 update of its Canada's Energy Future Report. And you can see that top bar is just the aggregate amount. The bottom two lines represent the contributions to that aggregate amount from Alberta and from British Columbia. The blue is Alberta, the green is British Columbia. The point I really want to make here is well, a couple. First, you could see production increasing in these areas. If I had put up the NEB's reference case from early in 2016, you would have seen Alberta production actually declining a little bit, but they are now showing a little bit of an increase with its update from about a year ago. But the other thing, and I think the really notable thing here, is in their reference case, you see that big jump from British Columbia. That reference case includes the assumption that LNG export terminals will be built. So there is an assumption built into the reference case that there will be new markets for this gas. That dashed green line down there is their assumption of production from British Columbia if no LNG export terminals are built. So the gap between the dashed line and the solid green line is effectively gas that needs a new market to be produced. Without new markets, that gas will remain in the ground. Okay, moving on, just taking a look at Rockies and San Juan Basin production. You can see here again, a little bit of a decline over the next couple of years, or flat, essentially production picking up again then in the 2020s. Okay, I'm going to move on from supply into prices. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to type them into the text box, and we'll take them as we see them. A couple things notable on this slide. Projected natural gas price. The main line there in the middle is the Energy Information Administration's 2017 Annual Energy Outlook, Henry Hub estimate. And what's notable, well, first I'll note that I've also plotted the last few years of the EIA's Annual Energy Outlook from 2008, which was pre-recession and really pre-shale. Even in 2008, those shale supplies were starting to come online. It was not a well-known fact or well-understood resource at that point in time. And so you can see that the tail end of that price forecast from 2008 is just going up, up, up. And that was really what we were seeing from every forecast they had put out for the previous number of years that I've been involved. I see a question here. Let me finish my point on this slide, and then I'll get to your question here on the Rockies production. So for most of the first decade of the 21st century, the price forecast was inexorably up and a fairly steep curve. And that's what makes this forecast notable. I think the first time I've seen in tracking, all the years of tracking the Energy Information Administration's forecasts on commodity prices, the first time I saw a level off in that forecast was last year in the 2016 outlook, when they were estimating that by about 2025, natural gas prices, commodity costs would hit about $5 a decatherm in real dollars, and then would just level off. I'd never seen that before through the end of their forecast period. You see the same leveling off phenomenon occurring in this year's annual energy outlook. Only we don't hit $5 until 2030, and then it stays at about $5 through 2040, and then they're projecting some increase in prices after that. The other lines plotted on there are from the Northwest Power and Conservation Council's 7th power plan, and this is the 2017 update of their fuel price forecast for the 3 hubs that we depend on, ACO, Sumas, and Opal. And you can see we traded a discount to the Henry Hub, and in fact, we tend to trade at a discount. Of course, ACO trades at a discount to Sumas and Opal too, generally speaking. So back to the Rocky San Juan, that the top line is a cumulative line. So the difference between the Rockies and the San Juan is simply the San Juan contribution. So that is a cumulative graph. Okay. I like to put this slide up. This is again from the Energy Information Administration's AEO, 2017 AEO, and it just takes a look at energy equivalent liquid fuel prices, basically, or compressed natural gas, as the case may be, in gasoline gallon equivalents. And it just shows as a transportation fuel, natural gas is going to continue to be a pretty good bargain. Whether it's a good enough bargain to warrant paying the upfront costs necessary to transition to natural gas remains an open question. Our members are working very hard to see that happen, and we're helping them where we can. Okay, so that's the first part of the presentation, supply and prices. We're going to move into now demand and talk a little bit about that. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the chat box there. So this is historic demand across the Pacific Northwest, and we take these numbers. They include Idaho, Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia. And you can see a couple things from this slide. Nothing much has changed. So this represents actual loads, so weather affected. You can see, for instance, in 2008, looks like we had a pretty cold winter as residential and commercial demand was high. Same thing in 2011. Last year and the year before, perhaps a little bit warmer weathers in 2015 and 2016, winters in 2015 and 2016. But the main thing to note here, a couple points. These are trends I point out every year. We've lost some significant industrial demand out of the region, both in the Western energy crisis of 2000, 2001, and associated with the Great Recession, 2008, 2009. And of course, the growth of natural gas as a generation fuel in our region, which is quite variable, actually, since it is the fuel on the margin. So when there's plenty of water or plenty of wind, gas doesn't burn. See that 2011 year, for instance, we don't burn very much gas for generation. However, 2015, you can see, which was a dry year, lower water year, we had our record burn for natural gas as a generation fuel. I'm hoping you're all hearing me okay. Connor's encouraging me to stay close to the computer, so sorry if I fade in and out. That last column on there is just the first year of our outlook. That is a weather normalized number, so we assume normal weather when we make our forecasts. So you can just see what's going on there. Okay. This slide just shows really in effect that we're using our infrastructure in the region a little differently than we did 20 years ago. 20 years ago, about 50% of our load was industrial, That's typically not affected by the weather, and the other 50% was a more weather-dependent load. Today, that is more like about a third and two-thirds. So about a little more than two-thirds of our load is weather-dependent. At least it was in 2016, and about a third of it is industrial load. Here's our forecast, the numbers you've all been waiting for. We are at 0.8 compound annual growth rate on average over the forecast period. And a couple notables here for you. Residential and commercial are roughly the same. We're projecting roughly the same growth as we did last year. The industrial load we picked up, we were at 0.1% CAGR last year. We're at 0.6% CAGR this year. And generation has dropped from 1.8% last year to 1.2% this year, and you see some of that growth there at the end of the forecast period. Okay. This is the forecast for the 2017-18 heating year done by outlook year. So it's the same year and a number of our forecasts across the same year. And you can see in 2008, prior to the recession, we were expecting higher loads this upcoming year. And then we had the recession, and that moderated our perspective on this year. And then we had another kind of step down in 2012, where it's really effectively been pretty stable since 2012 for this heating year. So this is just a way of looking at our outlook and saying, are we staying about right, or are things varying a lot? So if you take a look at this single heating year and the forecast across, we've seen a couple of step downs, but since about 2012, we're looking pretty consistent. Now, the one exception would be the 2016, last year's outlook study. I have not taken the time to analyze what went on here, but I am thinking, based on what we're seeing for the forecast loads in the 2017 outlook versus the 2016 outlook, that we had an aberration in last year's data. This year seems to be more consistent with the prior year's forecasts. Okay. Just another way of thinking about that, the peak day forecast has also declined since the recession occurred, and I think there's a couple things going on here. One, of course, we saw loads drop off, but I think more importantly, we're continuing to see more efficient appliances and building envelopes installed in the region. And probably one of the things contributing, this is anecdotal, doesn't show up in the data, but I would say I think one of the things that we're seeing is the change in housing stock that's being built in our region. Certainly along the I-5 corridor, we are seeing more multifamily housing being built, which is a more challenging market for natural gas to penetrate than prior to the recession. So that may be one explanation, just one good guess here. So I have a question here, and the question is, how do changes in regional demand composition, so we're talking about this slide here, impact how you all plan for procuring and using supply in your pipeline use and needs? I'm not going to answer the question directly, because I think that's a question for everybody to consider, but I think one of the implications of this particular slide is that in the non-peak periods, we have plenty of capacity available to serve the region. And I have another slide a little bit later that'll demonstrate this. But on that day when everybody needs supply, everybody needs it. And it's pretty tough to think about building pipeline capacity, as an example, expanding pipeline capacity to serve loads that only occur for short periods of time. And I think, of course, that's an essential component of the planning process. And those are the evaluations that each of our members are always making. What is the most cost-effective resource to acquire to ensure that we can serve the load we're forecasting? So I do have another slide that maybe gets into that a little bit, and that's this slide right here. This is our peak supply-demand balance. The green bars there are our peak day. Now, again, this is a peak day. We're assuming right here, everybody's design day, each one of our utilities' design day occur on the same day with these slides. So not super likely, it's possible, not highly probable, probably. So I think those green bars have a little bit of squish in them, but that's what that picture looks like. So that assumes Vancouver and Boise, Spokane and Portland, and all points in between are hitting a design day on the same day. And you can see there, generally speaking, the infrastructure is sufficient to serve the load. Now, those orange bars are the average January day. So that's the highest load month of our forecast period. And that's an average January day. And then the red down at the bottom is an average annual day. I think the point of this slide is twofold. One, the pipeline capacity is pretty well built to supply that coldest month period of time. And then you see the blue and the purple lines there are increasing over time to kind of match up with those peak days. So the point is, back to the original question, the point is that our members are always evaluating the resources necessary to serve the load they're forecasting, and they're looking for the ability to serve that forecast load with resources that are the least reasonable cost resources. So you're seeing here, the resource selections are storage. And you can see one of the things that's going on here in the underground storage piece, that represents the North Mist expansion being undertaken by Northwest Natural to serve Portland General Electric's generating capacity out there. And then in the purple line up there, there's a couple things. One is Puget Sound Energy's Tacoma LNG plant comes online, and another is they have a propane air facility that's offline right now and will come online if necessary. It's undergoing upgrades right now. So point is, those seem to be the resources that were the least reasonable cost resources available to serve forecast load on a design day. Now I'm going to take a moment here to read another question. So the question is, I'll just read it out, and I'm not sure how to answer it, Eric, but how much do the varied energy efficiency policies and rebates on offer since the recession play a role in the reduction of peak consumption being forecast? I think certainly energy efficiency has played a role, but I do think one of the things that we've seen that may have played a significant role, I should say, I don't want to minimize it at all, but I do think one of the things that we've seen that has had a big impact on those forecast loads is a shift from single family new construction to more multifamily. It's not to say there's no single family going on. There's plenty going on, but it's not as robust as it was prior to the recession. There's more multifamily going on. So I think to your point, there has been certainly some impact from the energy efficiency policies and proposals, rebates and the like, incentives on that peak forecast. So let's talk about the demand scenarios. First of all, why are we doing scenarios? Well, as mentioned at the outset, our outlook study accommodates or aggregates our member companies' planning documents, IRPs in particular, and we know that there are some projects or some possibilities of new loads that aren't reflected in those documents. So we thought we should take a look at just what are reasonable expectations around that, and what might that do to overall load in the region. So two examples are we have coal retirements. Boardman and Centralia are both retiring, at least in part. Boardman in whole by 2021, and half of TransAlta Centralia plant in 2021. And we do know that some of that retiring load might be replaced by natural gas. That's at least a reasonable assumption to make. So we put in a scenario that says some of those coal retirements will be replaced by natural gas. And the other thing that we hear about are several industrial type loads. I have them listed down at the bottom of this project. This is not to say that any one of these would drive anything, or any one of them would be done or not done. But we do know that these potential large loads are being actively discussed in the region, and so we thought we'd take a look at what impact might some of that have. Now, if all 6 of those, including the generic US, Canada, and the small scale LNG, if all 6 of those projects or scenarios were realized, we'd have quite a large load. What we're suggesting in our scenario is only about a third of those total proposed volumes. So 250, a total of 750,000 decatherms a day over the forecast period. And this is what that looks like. So you can see the coal retirements there, that purple bar. And then the generic industrial loads, whatever those large loads might be, are in the orange there. And you can see this is annual demand. They certainly do add to our annual demand. We'll get into peak supply demand balance a little bit more in just a moment. I have a couple questions here. How does the electric car industry impact supply and demand, if at all? I'm just going to give you my gut reaction, visceral reaction answer to that question. I think there may be some impact, but it would be in generation. And from what I'm hearing is most of the folks who are involved with the electric car industry don't believe there would be a huge impact on that load. So as I showed in a previous slide, natural gas is the resource on the margin, the generation fuel that's on the margin. So to the extent that EVs add to load, gas will be the marginal resource that fuels that generation. I hope that's helpful. That's just a yes on my part. And then I have another question. When you list pipeline capacity on the peak day supply demand chart, is that for the entire system, or are some compressor stations and choke points less than that line, i.e. needing firm capacity through Chehalis, etc.? So the question really points out what could be considered a little bit of a vulnerability in our outlook study. We do try to take into account this is region-wide capacity. So it assumes that gas is flowing throughout the region freely. And so yes, of course, there is a constraint at Chehalis. There's a constraint at Roosevelt on the Columbia River that affect flows according to seasonality, though. But this, we've tried our best to try to account for those in this calculation. So I hope that answers the question. It's pretty hard to do without a much more flexible tool. This is our best swag at it. And here's the peak supply demand balance. Again, you see the pipeline and the underground and peak shaving storage there. And you can see that if some of these loads came on we would probably, folks who bring those loads on and others in the region may want to be thinking about the resources that they need to ensure that they're going to continue serving the loads they're forecasting. So I think I just say the important takeaway from this slide is it can take 3 to 5 years to build significant infrastructure projects. And I think all of our member companies are watching this very closely to identify when and if these projects are getting real and taking appropriate actions to ensure that they can serve the loads they're forecasting. Okay. The other thing, again, I just want to reemphasize that of course the resources do change over time as we see increased load. We're picking up little increments of capacity here to try to serve those loads. Now, this slide is a little different than the one I showed previously, which is really this one here, which is the more relevant slide because the loads on this slide are really speculative. And then just to note that there are a number of projects across the region designed to enhance service to the region. These are all market driven. If there is commercial interest in these projects, any one of them, they'll get built. If there isn't enough commercial interest, they won't get built. And I think one of the takeaways from our outlook study is organic demand in the region, that is the core market demands, growth in demand that already exists here is probably not enough to catalyze one or another of these projects, but maybe one or more of these larger projects, if they were to come in, we would see perhaps infrastructure capacity built. That's a broad statement. I would say there's work going on, the NGTL West Path expansion, the T-South looping, and the like. Those some of those are happening in small increments. So it's just a slide to note that the market infrastructure providers are trying to be responsive to the market, and provide options to the market for that time when commercial interests want to sign up for it. And so with that, that's our 2017 outlook. Again, you can look for the hard copy, which includes all the data tables and other salient information in the next couple of weeks, I'm hoping anyway. But we're happy to contact me directly at the email there or at the phone number on this slide if you want to talk about any of these things offline. In the meantime, I'd be happy to answer any additional questions from folks that might type something in. We'll give it just a minute for that to happen.
Thanks, Dan. While we wait for a couple of questions, I just want to remind everyone that you can go to our website at nwga.org to sign up for our future webinars. We are scheduled out at this point through January, so we'd love to see everybody back both next month and the months after that. So we will give it a couple more minutes to wait on questions, and again remind you that you can get a copy of this slide deck by sending me an email. Or a link to this presentation, a recording of this presentation, also by sending me an email. Thanks.
I do have another question here. How do changes to underground storage rules at the federal and at the state level, California in particular, affect your member companies? We haven't. I'm aware that our member companies are, of course, tracking that very closely. I haven't heard any issues there yet. I know that Jackson Prairie, near Chehalis, Washington, the operators there, Puget Sound Energy, have gone through a pretty thorough operating review to ensure that everything feels good. And I know that Northwest Natural has done the same thing in this Mist facility, but beyond that, I don't think we've seen major impacts from particularly federal changes. Certainly none from none that I'm aware of from California. I am aware that Northwest Natural operates a storage facility in California as well. Gill Ranch, but I'm not aware of any negative impacts anyway on their operations from those changes. Another question here is, to what extent do the utility demand forecasts include projections about demand driven by natural gas for transportation? Right now, not much, Robert. I would say it's a small component of current demand projections. It's incorporated generally in, I would say, natural gas for transportation uses broadly, including marine and the like, are typically caught up in our industrial load forecasts, and it's not a huge component yet. We'd like to see that grow. How does the DOE grid resiliency proposal being handled by FERC impact or factor into your expectations for gas needs? Honestly, I have not taken a look at that yet, and have not asked my members how they perceive it's affecting them yet. So I don't have an answer for you in that regard.
Great. Well, thanks, Dan, and thank you, everyone, for your great questions here. I think with that, we will, in the absence of other questions, probably wrap things up. Again, shoot me an email if you'd like to request either of those two things that I mentioned before, and otherwise, I will look forward to seeing all of you next month on November 9th.